Chapter 1. The Heroes Who Felt Real. Now, this is where the X-Men get complicated. Because, yes, if mutants existed in real life, I would be terrified. I am not going to sit here and pretend I would see a teenager accidentally blow up a school gym with his eyes and go, you know what, this is probably fine, let's just give him a pamphlet and some emotional support. No, I would have questions. Several questions, some of them cowardly. But that is also what makes the X-Men different. Because before they are dangerous, before they are political, before they become a headline, a government problem, or another reason for some bald man in a suit to build robots, they are people. That sounds obvious, but that is the whole thing. Most superheroes choose this life in some way. Batman wakes up every night and chooses violence in a cape. Spider-Man gets bit, learns responsibility, and somehow still has time to be broke in every universe. The Avengers are basically celebrity firefighters with better hair. The Justice League are gods with branding. But the X-Men are different. Most mutants do not choose anything. The powers just show up one day, like a curse, a medical condition, and a lawsuit, all at the same time. Cyclops does not wake up and say, you know what would make my life better? If opening my eyes became a federal emergency. Rogue does not ask for the ability to ruin the simple act of touching another person. Jean Grey does not sit down and fill out a form that says, yes, I would like to become emotionally unstable Space Jesus. Jubilee does not get to stay a normal kid because the universe decided she needed fireworks and trauma. That is why the X-Men feel so real to me. They are not heroes because their lives are better. A lot of the time, their powers make their lives worse. Their gift is also the thing that gets them feared, hunted, abandoned, experimented on, or forced into a mansion with matching uniforms and the world's most suspicious school counselor. And this is why I think X-Men works best as a coming-of-age story. Because growing up is already weird. Your body changes, your emotions get stupid, your identity becomes confusing, and everybody around you suddenly has an opinion about who you are becoming. Now imagine all of that, except instead of acne, you get laser eyes. Instead of mood swings, you read minds. Instead of an awkward first date, you accidentally put somebody in a coma because you held their hand too long. That is not just superhero fantasy, that is puberty as a horror movie. And somehow, after all that, the X-Men still choose to help. That is the part that matters. Not that they have powers. Everybody in comics has powers. Half of Marvel can bench press a bus, shoot something glowing out of their hands, or survive getting thrown through a building like that is a normal Tuesday. The X-Men are heroic because the world gives them every possible reason to hate it, and most of them still keep showing up to save it. That is what makes characters like Jubilee important. She is not just another mutant on the team. She represents the life mutants should be allowed to have. A normal life, a young life, a life where becoming different does not immediately turn you into a soldier. Cyclops represents the other side of that. Responsibility, control, discipline. The man has been disrespected by adaptations for years, and I used to fall for it too. I thought he was just the boring guy telling Wolverine to stop being cool. Then I grew up and realized Cyclops was usually the only adult in a room full of walking insurance claims. And Rogue is the heart of it for me, because Rogue makes the whole mutant question personal. Her power is not about destroying a city or declaring war on mankind. It is about touch. It is about intimacy. It is about wanting to be close to someone and knowing you might hurt them if you are. That is the tragedy of the X-Men. They are heroes, but they are not harmless. They are victims, but they are not powerless. They are people, but their existence changes everything around them. And that is where the uncomfortable part starts. Because as much as I love them, as much as I think they deserve sympathy, dignity, and the right to exist without being hunted, the fear does not come from nowhere. Chapter 2. The fear has evidence. The fear does not come from nowhere. And I know that sounds bad. That sounds like the kind of sentence a government agent says right before he starts asking children if they can shoot lasers out of their hands. But that is the uncomfortable truth of the X-Men. The humans are not afraid because they invented something out of thin air. They are not looking at a completely harmless group of people and deciding to be evil for fun. Even though sometimes the government in X-Men does seem to wake up, drink coffee and ask itself, how can I make life worse for a teenager today? The fear has evidence. Now, that does not mean the hatred is justified. That does not mean the Sentinels are justified. That does not mean mutant registration is automatically good. That does not mean you get to build giant racist Roombas with missile launchers and pretend you are the reasonable one. Fear is one thing. What you do with fear is where everything gets ugly. And this is where Jean Grey comes back into my life once again, because apparently my childhood crush was also a public safety crisis. When I was younger, Jean Grey was just Jean Grey. Red hair, powers, dramatic voice, the whole package. I was not sitting there thinking about the ethical consequences of telepathy. I was thinking, wow, I love X-Men. I was a simple man. A stupid man, but a simple one. Then you get older and realize Jean Grey is terrifying. Not because she is evil. That is the important part. Jean is not scary because she is walking around like Apocalypse with better hair. Jean is scary because she is good. She cares. She loves people. She wants to help. And sometimes that still might not be enough. Because when you start talking about Jean Grey, eventually you have to talk about Phoenix. And when you talk about Phoenix, the conversation stops being, should mutants be accepted by society? And becomes, what do we do if one person becomes powerful enough to turn society into soup? That is a different conversation. That is not a town hall meeting anymore. That is everyone on Earth looking up at the sky and saying, so, are we dead now, or is this just another emotional arc? And Jean is not the only one. Magneto is the easiest example of why humans would panic, because Magneto is not just some guy who can throw a car. He controls metal. Do you understand how much of modern civilization is metal? Bridges, guns, cars, trains, planes, buildings, ships, military bases, doors, locks, fences, probably half the chair you are sitting on right now. Magneto makes Home Depot look like an arms dealer. If Magneto existed in real life, every government on Earth would immediately start sweating through their classified folders. You would see world leaders on television trying to act calm while secretly removing every paperclip from the building. And the worst part is, you would understand why. You do not have to hate mutants to be afraid of Magneto. You do not have to be some foaming at the mouth villain with a secret lab and a trench coat. You can be a regular person, see Magneto lift a stadium or rip the metal out of something and think, yeah, I am going to stand very far away from that man. That does not make oppression right, it just makes the fear real. Then there is Cyclops. And Cyclops is important because his danger is not cosmic like Jean or political like Magneto. His danger is everyday. His power turns the most normal human action imaginable into a threat. He opens his eyes and creates a problem. That is insane. Cyclops has to treat blinking like a hostage negotiation. The man wakes up every morning and immediately has to make sure he does not accidentally turn the bedroom wall into a memory. That is not just a power. That is a full-time job with no benefits. And this is why I respect him now. When I was younger, I thought Cyclops was boring because he was always the serious one. Wolverine was stabbing people. Gambit was throwing cards like a stylish criminal. Jean was being Jean. Rogue was existing as the correct answer. And Cyclops was there telling everyone to stay focused. But now I get it. Cyclops is not boring. Cyclops is discipline. Cyclops is control. Cyclops is what happens when the emergency plan becomes a person. And even then, you can understand why someone would be afraid of him. Because if a person's body can turn into a weapon by accident, fear is not irrational. Fear is just math with a panic attack attached. Then there is Rogue. And I do not want to spend the whole Rogue chapter here, because my queen deserves her own throne later. But Rogue is maybe the saddest version of this argument, because Rogue is not scary because she wants to hurt people. Rogue is scary because she can hurt people while wanting the exact opposite. That is the tragedy. With Magneto, people fear war. With Jean, people fear extinction. With Cyclops, people fear accident. But with Rogue, people fear closeness. That is a different kind of pain. If Rogue reaches for someone, the fear is real. If she touches you too long, something terrible can happen. That is not propaganda. That is not a rumor. That is not some politician exaggerating for votes. That is her actual life. But if all you see is the danger and not the girl carrying it, then you already failed the test. And this is where the X-Men becomes so hard to talk about, because the fear can be valid but incomplete. You can be right to be careful around someone and still wrong to treat them like a monster. That brings us to telepathy, which might be the power that would make me lose my mind the fastest. Because everybody wants mind reading when they imagine themselves having it. Of course, you imagine walking into a room and knowing what people really think. That sounds useful. That sounds powerful. That sounds like something I would absolutely abuse for small, petty reasons and then pretend I was being responsible. But living around someone else who can read minds? Absolutely not. If my neighbor tells me he can hear thoughts, I am not bringing over cookies. I am changing every password I have and thinking in Spanish just in case. Telepathy is terrifying because it does not leave a bruise. It does not break a window. It does not knock down a building. It goes somewhere worse. Inside. A telepath does not need to break into your house. Your skull is already the front door. And that is why even Xavier, who I do believe is a good man, still represents something unsettling. I trust his dream. I trust his heart. I do not think he is secretly evil. But would I want a bald billionaire school principal with psychic powers having access to my thoughts? No. Respectfully, no. Disrespectfully, absolutely not. Because privacy is one of the last things people feel like they own. Your thoughts are supposed to be yours. The ugly ones, the stupid ones, the embarrassing ones, the ones you would never say out loud because society only works if everyone agrees not to confess every insane thing their brain produces at 2 o'clock in the morning. Telepathy puts all of that in danger. And when you start adding all of this together, it becomes obvious why the world of X-Men would panic. How does a school handle a kid whose powers manifest during a panic attack? How does a hospital treat someone whose body is poisonous? How does a police department arrest someone who can control metal? How does a parent raise a child who might accidentally burn down the house because puberty decided to come with special effects? Society can barely handle teenagers with phones. Now imagine giving one of them reality warping powers and telling everybody to remain calm. No one would remain calm. I would not remain calm. That is the honest answer. If mutants existed, the fear would be real. Jean Grey, Magneto, Cyclops, Rogue, telepathy. Children born with powers no one can predict and no one knows how to control. Humanity is not insane for being afraid, but that is where the danger begins. Because fear having evidence does not make fear innocent. The second fear stops seeing people and starts seeing problems. Everything changes. The X-Men stop being neighbors, students, daughters, sons, friends, and children. They become threats. And once people become threats, society starts asking what it is allowed to do to them. That is the real horror. Not that humans are afraid, but that fear can sound reasonable right before it becomes cruel. And the most uncomfortable part is that this problem does not disappear when the mutants are good. Chapter 3. Registration. The sensible idea that becomes a nightmare. And once fear starts sounding reasonable, society reaches for the next dangerous word: responsibility. That is where registration comes in. And here is where I might lose some people, because in theory, I understand mutant registration. I do not like that I understand it. I do not enjoy agreeing with the side of the argument that usually ends with a government official standing in front of a podium saying something insane like, "We are only doing this for public safety," while 3 helicopters hover over a school full of children. But I understand it. If people can read minds, control metal, level buildings, absorb memories, shoot lasers, open portals, or accidentally turn a cafeteria into a crime scene because puberty came with DLC, then maybe we should know about that is not an insane sentence. It is not automatically evil to ask questions. That is what makes it hard. Because if mutants existed in real life, society would need answers. Who has powers? What can they do? Do they understand them? Can they control them? Are they dangerous by accident? Are they dangerous on purpose? Are they a criminal? Are they a scared kid who needs help before they become a headline? These are fair questions. If my local high school sends out an email saying, "One of our students may or may not be able to melt steel with his feelings," I am reading that email. I am opening the attachment. I am attending the parent meeting. I do not even have a child at the school, but now I am involved, spiritually. So yes, I understand why people would want registration. The problem is not only the idea of knowing, the problem is who gets to know. Because that is where the whole thing starts rotting from the inside. Who holds the list? The government, the military, police, schools, private companies, some scientist with a white coat and no social skills, some politician who says the word safety so many times you start to hear the evil forming behind it. That is the real question. Because a list is never just a list. A list is power. A list says where people are, what they can do, who their family is, whether they are trained, whether they are dangerous, whether they are useful, whether they are afraid, whether they are alone. And if there is one thing I do not trust, it is the government with a list of people it is scared of. Do I trust the government to handle mutant registration fairly? Absolutely not. I have seen the DMV struggle with regular humans. I am not giving them a list of laser children. The government would hear, "Mutant child needs guidance," and somehow respond with a spreadsheet, a drone, and 3 men named Agent Johnson. And none of them would be helpful. All of them would have sunglasses. One of them would definitely say, "We just want to talk," which is government language for, "You should already be running." But to be fair, I do not fully trust the X-Men to police themselves either. I love them, I do. But do not worry, the private mutant mansion is handling it is not exactly a public safety policy. That is not a plan. That is a rich bald man saying, "Trust me, I have this under control," while half the students can destroy a neighborhood if they have a bad enough Wednesday. And I like Xavier. I believe in the dream. I believe he is trying to do the right thing. But if the answer to mutant accountability is the telepathic school principal will handle it, I still have concerns. Several concerns. Some of them legal, some of them spiritual. So that is the trap. The government cannot be trusted with absolute control. The X-Men cannot simply be trusted to self-regulate with no questions asked. And ordinary people cannot be expected to pretend they are not afraid. That is why registration sounds responsible. At first. At first, it is information. Then it becomes monitoring. Where do they live? Where do they go to school? Who are their parents? What can they do? Are they moving? Are they hiding? Are they dangerous? Are they unregistered? Once you are on the list, your life is not just your life anymore. It becomes data, and data does not love you. Data does not know you. Data does not care that you are scared or lonely or 13 years old, or that your power manifested in the worst moment of your life and now everybody acts like you did it on purpose. Data does not see Rogue wanting to touch someone without hurting them. Data sees absorption ability, high risk. Data does not see Cyclops spending every second of his life trying to control himself. Data sees optic blast, structural threat. Data does not see a child. Data sees category. And that is how surveillance becomes targeting.
Nobody calls it oppression at first. They never do. That would be too honest, and honesty is bad for public relations. They call it safety. They call it procedure. They call it temporary. They call it necessary. They call it protective custody, which is one of the most terrifying phrases humans have ever invented, because it somehow manages to sound like a hug and a kidnapping at the same time. And once the list exists, somebody will eventually decide what to do with it. Maybe it starts with restrictions. Certain mutants cannot go certain places. Certain powers need approval. Certain kids need supervision. Certain families need check-ins. Certain people need to be watched for everyone's safety. Then someone decides watching is not enough. Then someone decides dangerous mutants need to be contained. Then someone decides containment is not enough. Then someone decides the safest mutant is the mutant who cannot use their powers. And eventually, someone decides the safest mutant is the mutant who is gone. That is how the nightmare moves. Slowly, bureaucratically, with signatures, with meetings, with people saying, "We had no choice," while making choices the entire time. And this is where my own answer becomes a problem. Because I said I understand registration. I said I would probably support it in theory. I said it is better to know than not know. And I still think that. But if someone in my family was a mutant and the government came to the door asking questions, I am lying immediately, with confidence, with range, Oscar-level performance. I am giving that agent the greatest acting work of my life. I am looking him in the face and saying, "Mutant? In this house? Sir, we can barely get the Wi-Fi to work." Because the moment the system comes for someone you love, the argument changes. Suddenly, it is not about policy. It is not about public safety. It is not about reasonable concerns. It is about whether you trust the people at the door more than the person behind you. And I do not. That is the problem with registration. It asks a reasonable question, but it creates a terrifying answer. Shouldn't we know who can hurt people? Maybe. But then the list starts asking new questions. Where are they? What can they do? Can we control them? Can we use them? Can we remove them? And eventually, can we build something to handle them for us? That is where this goes. Because before fear becomes a sentinel, it becomes paperwork. Chapter 4. The Sentinel is fear without a soul. Because before fear becomes a sentinel, it becomes paperwork. And then eventually, the paperwork grows legs. Giant purple legs usually, because subtlety has never been humanity's strong suit in the X-Men universe. That is what the Sentinels are. They are not just big robots. They are not just another villain for the X-Men to punch through a building. The Sentinels are worse than that. They are policy with fists. They are a government form that learned how to walk, scan your DNA, and ruin your entire bloodline before lunch. And that is why they scare me more than almost anything else in X-Men. Because Magneto is terrifying,
But at least Magneto is a person, a very dangerous person, a man who should not be left alone near bridges, stadiums, coins, silverware, or basically civilization in general, but still a person. Apocalypse is terrifying too, but Apocalypse has the decency to be dramatic. That man speaks like every sentence was written on a stone tablet during a thunderstorm. He believes in something monstrous, but he believes in it. He has ideology, he has ego, he has the energy of someone who wakes up every morning and thinks, how can I make evolution worse? But Sentinels are different. Sentinels do not need speeches, they do not need revenge, they do not need trauma, they do not need a tragic childhood, a dark prophecy, or a villain monologue where they explain why humanity deserves to suffer while the camera slowly pushes in on their face. A Sentinel just scans you. That is it. It looks at you, identifies what you are, and the moral conversation is over. That is horrifying, because a human being can hesitate. Not always. Sometimes people are horrible and they sprint toward cruelty like there is a gift card at the finish line. But a person can hesitate. A soldier can doubt. A neighbor can recognize your face. A teacher can remember you are a child. A parent can say no. A machine does not have to do any of that. A machine does not have to hate you. And that might be worse. Hate at least means somebody is feeling something. Hate is ugly, but it is alive. The Sentinel is empty. It does not look at Jubilee and think, that is a kid. It does not look at Rogue and think, that is a girl who is already terrified of hurting people. It does not look at Cyclops and think, that is a man holding himself together every second of the day. It sees mutant. And apparently, that is enough. Child, mutant. Teacher, mutant. Hero, mutant. Mother, mutant. Someone running away, mutant. Someone standing still, mutant. Someone begging, mutant. Someone who saved the world yesterday, mutant. That is the nightmare of the Sentinel. It does not care about context. It does not care about mercy. It does not care if you are dangerous, harmless, guilty, innocent, trained, untrained, scared, brave, good, bad, or just unlucky enough to be born different in a world that keeps building machines about it. It reduces a person to a category, and categories are easy to destroy. That is the part that makes them feel so evil to me. Not just the violence. Comic books have violence everywhere. Someone gets thrown through concrete every 10 minutes and somehow walks it off like they just had a rough shift at Target. The violence is not new. The coldness is. The Sentinel is not angry. It is not offended. It is not afraid the way humans are afraid. It is what happens after fear has already made all the decisions. Humanity gets scared. Humanity makes a list. Humanity builds the system. And then the system acts like it was always inevitable. That is the genius and cowardice of the Sentinel. Nobody has to feel like the monster anymore. The machine can do that part. A person does not have to personally drag a mutant child out of their home. A person does not have to look Rogue in the eye. A person does not have to watch Cyclops try to explain himself. A person does not have to hear Jubilee scream. The machine does it. And then everyone else gets to stand far away and say things like, it was protocol. It was necessary. It was for public safety. We had no choice. Which is always a funny sentence, because somehow the people saying, we had no choice, are usually standing next to the giant robot they chose to build. That is why Sentinels are not just scary because they are strong. They are scary because they let people outsource cruelty. They are guilt with a battery pack. They are fear with better funding. They are basically what happens when someone asks, what if racism had better battery life?
And yes, that is a dark joke. But honestly, what else do you call a machine designed to identify a group of people by birth and eliminate them for existing? At a certain point, the robot is not the problem. The robot is the confession. The Sentinel tells us what humanity was already thinking.
It says the quiet part with laser beams. And the worst part is, this all comes from a fear that had evidence. That is what makes it so dangerous. Humans are afraid of Jean Grey losing control. They are afraid of Magneto declaring war. They are afraid of children born with powers nobody understands. They are afraid of telepaths, reality warpers, metal gods, walking disasters, and every other mutant that makes normal life feel like it is being held together with tape and prayer. That fear is real. But then humanity builds something that can only understand fear. That is the problem. A sentinel cannot love. It cannot forgive. It cannot make exceptions. It cannot look at a mutant and think, maybe this person needs help. It can only follow the logic it was given. Find the threat, classify the threat, remove the threat. And once you build a machine that can decide who counts as a threat, the only thing left is scale. 1 mutant, 10 mutants, a school, a neighborhood, a city, an island. That is where this road goes. The Sentinel is not the end of fear, it is fear becoming efficient. And this is why Magneto becomes so hard to dismiss. Because every time he says humanity will eventually choose control over coexistence, the Sentinels stand there like evidence with glowing eyes. He is not right about everything, not even close. The man can give the greatest speech you have ever heard and then immediately do something that makes you remember why nobody should give him emergency powers. But when a species builds machines to hunt children, the angry man in the helmet suddenly becomes harder to laugh off. And that is where Magneto becomes more than just a villain. He becomes the warning. Chapter 5: Magneto, the survivor who became the warning. And that is where Magneto becomes more than just a villain. He becomes the warning. Because after registration, after Sentinels, after the lists and the machines and the government saying public safety with the most criminal face possible, Magneto becomes a lot harder to treat like some regular comic book bad guy. And to be fair, X-Men has regular bad guys. Apocalypse wants survival of the fittest and talks like every sentence needs a choir behind it. Sabretooth looks like he was raised by a hate crime in the woods. Mr. Sinister has the energy of a man who should not be allowed within 500 feet of a laboratory, a mirror, or a hot topic. Those are villains. Easy. Magneto is different. Magneto is dangerous because sometimes he starts talking and you hate how much sense he makes. That is what makes him scary. Not just the powers. The powers are already insane. The man controls metal. We already talked about this. If Magneto is in a bad mood, your car becomes a weapon, your keys become a threat, and every bridge in the area starts looking like a hostage. Civilization itself is basically one bad Magneto day away from becoming modern art. But that is not what makes him the best X-Men villain. Magneto is not dangerous because he is always wrong. Magneto is dangerous because he is not wrong enough to ignore. And that is the part that changed for me. As a kid, I sided with Xavier. Of course I did. Xavier was the dream. He was hope. He had the school, the calm voice, the big moral speeches, the whole beautiful bald package. He believed humans and mutants could live together. He believed people could change. He believed the world did not have to stay cruel forever. That is the answer you want to believe when you are younger. And honestly, I still believe in Xavier's dream. I do not think the dream is naive. I think it is necessary. The alternative is everyone building walls, weapons, lists, and robots until the whole planet turns into one big panic room. But the older I get, the more Magneto stops sounding like the villain trying to ruin the dream and starts sounding like the man who already knows how dreams get murdered. That does not mean I think Magneto is right, and I need to say that clearly because the internet loves saying Magneto was right, because the internet loves taking complicated trauma and turning it into a bumper sticker. Magneto was not right. Not fully. He is right about what humanity can become. He is wrong about what that gives him permission to become. That is the difference. Because Magneto's worldview does not come from nowhere. He is not some rich man who got bored and decided to become evil because his childhood was mildly inconvenient. Magneto has seen the worst of humanity. He has seen what happens when fear becomes policy. He has seen what happens when people are marked, separated, registered, dehumanized, and removed. So when Magneto hears humans talk about mutant registration, he does not hear paperwork. He hears the first step in a process he has already survived. That matters, because to most humans, registration might sound like safety. To Magneto, it sounds familiar. Too familiar. It sounds like a list. It sounds like a category. It sounds like the world preparing itself to decide who belongs and who does not. And that is why his argument is so strong. Magneto understands that humanity does not always become less cruel. Sometimes it just gets better at branding the cruelty. It stops saying hate and starts saying safety. It stops saying oppression and starts saying order. It stops saying extermination and starts saying threat reduction. Same monster, better vocabulary. And that is what makes him hard to dismiss. Because after you see the Sentinels, after you see the Collars, after you see Genosha, after you see humans over and over again choosing control instead of coexistence, Magneto does not sound paranoid anymore. He sounds tired. He sounds like someone who has been forced to watch the same nightmare update its costume and come back for another season. And that is why his speech in X-Men '97 hit so hard for me. Because that was the first time Magneto did not feel like a man just trying to win an argument. He sounded like a man who was exhausted from being proven right in the worst possible ways. That speech works because you can feel the wound behind it. You can feel the history. You can feel the anger, but you can also feel the grief underneath the anger. He is not begging humanity to understand him. He is not asking for permission. He is saying, I know what comes next because I have seen it before. And that is powerful. That is also terrifying. Because Magneto's greatest flaw is not that his rage is fake. His rage is real. His rage makes sense. That is what makes it so dangerous. The most dangerous rage is not the rage that comes from nowhere. It is the rage with receipts. The rage that can point to history. The rage that can say, I warned you. The rage that has evidence. And Magneto has evidence. But evidence is not the same thing as wisdom. Pain is not the same thing as permission. And survival is not the same thing as morality. That is where Magneto falls. His pain becomes certainty. His certainty becomes control. His control becomes violence. And somewhere along the way, the survivor becomes the warning. Because Magneto knows exactly what humans can become when they are afraid. He knows what they will justify. He knows how quickly public safety can become persecution. He knows how fast a neighbor can become a threat, a child can become a category, and a list can become a death sentence. But because he knows that, he starts treating the future like it has already happened. He does not just prepare for betrayal, he expects it. He does not just defend mutants, he decides humans will never change. And once you decide that, violence starts sounding like prevention. That is what scares me about him. Because if I was a mutant, I would probably want Magneto protecting me. That is the honest contradiction. If I lived in a world where the government had mutant lists, where sentinels could come through the sky, where people looked at me like a problem before they looked at me like a person, I would want the angry man in the helmet on my side. Of course I would. I am not built different. I am built scared. If robots are hunting mutants, I am not sitting there saying, where is the polite option? I am looking for the man who can turn a tank into a bracelet. But that is exactly why Magneto scares me. Because Magneto protects like a man who already decided peace is a trap. And maybe, sometimes it is. That is the problem. Magneto is protection to mutants. Magneto is apocalypse to humans. To Xavier, he is the friend who lost faith. And to the audience, he is the most uncomfortable thing a villain can be. Understandable, not innocent, not safe, not right. Understandable. That is what makes him the best X-Men villain. He is not just standing in opposition to Xavier's dream, he is the reason the dream has to prove itself. He is the voice saying, what if hope is just denial with better lighting? And Xavier needs that challenge. The X-Men need that challenge. Because without Magneto, the dream can sound too easy. Coexistence, peace, acceptance, beautiful words, necessary words. But Magneto is the one who asks what happens when the world does not choose those words back. Xavier is what the world could be if everyone chose better. Magneto is what happens when they do not. That is why he is more than a villain. He is a warning to humanity. He is what your cruelty creates. He is what happens when the people you fear finally believe you will never stop fearing them. But he is also a warning to mutants. He is what fear can turn you into if you let it become your entire worldview. Because fear can protect you, that is true. Fear can keep you alive. Fear can make you ready. Fear can tell you when the smile on someone's face does not match the knife in their hand. But fear cannot be the only thing driving the car, especially not when the car is made of metal and Magneto is angry. That is why I cannot say Magneto was right. I can only say he understood the danger better than most. He understood the list. He understood the machine. He understood the polite language before the violence. He understood history. But he was wrong about destiny. Because if the future is already decided, then no one is responsible for what they become. Humans are always oppressors. Mutants are always victims until they become rulers. Peace is always a lie. Mercy is always weakness. And the only answer left is power. That is not freedom. That is fear wearing a crown. And that is where Magneto becomes tragic. Because he is the survivor who became the warning. He warns humans what their cruelty creates. And he warns mutants what their fear can become. But as powerful as Magneto is, as important as his argument is, he is not the heart of the X-Men. He is the argument. He is the thunder. He is the man in the helmet telling the world exactly how ugly it is. But the mutant question is not always about war, speeches, history, machines, and men deciding the future of the species. Sometimes it is smaller than that. Sometimes the whole tragedy is just a girl who cannot touch the people she loves. Chapter 6. Rogue, the mutant question made personal. Sometimes it is just a girl who cannot touch the people she loves, and now we arrive at Rogue. Finally, the real treasure, the queen, the correct answer, the southern miracle. The reason Jean Grey had to be retired from my childhood crush Hall of Fame and placed gently in the historic artifacts section. Jean Grey was the childhood crush. Rogue is the adult answer. Growth, wisdom, a spiritual promotion, a full character arc. I will not pretend attraction plays no role here. I am not a liar, and Professor X is not in my head yet. Rogue walks into a scene with the hair, the jacket, the accent, the attitude, and suddenly every other mutant has to file for unemployment. She has a tragic backstory, emotional damage, and the kind of charm capable of making Gambit risk death on a weekly basis. Gambit looked at the human embodiment of do not touch and said, I can work with her. Respect, bravery, or stupidity. In romance, the line gets blurry. Still, Rogue is not my favourite only due to the obvious reasons. The obvious reasons are powerful. The obvious reasons have won wars. The obvious reasons deserve scholarship. Yet Rogue stayed with me for a deeper reason. Rogue takes the whole X-Men question and shrinks it down until it hurts. Magneto makes the question political. Jean makes it cosmic. Sentinels make it systematic. Rogue makes it personal. Jean makes you afraid of the sky. Magneto makes you afraid of civilization. Sentinels make you afraid of systems. Rogue makes you afraid of holding someone's hand. Brutal. Most powers in X-Men make someone dangerous to enemies. Rogue's power makes her dangerous to people she wants close. A hug becomes a risk. A kiss becomes a gamble. Comfort becomes strategy. Love needs gloves, distance, timing, luck, and possibly a waiver signed in front of a notary. Imagine needing emotional consent and tactical gear just to be hugged. Imagine living with a power where the safest way to love someone is to stay away from them. Not superhero fantasy, loneliness with a costume. Rogue does not need to destroy a city to prove the fear has evidence. Her power proves it in a quieter, meaner way. If Rogue reaches for someone, fear makes sense. If she touches someone too long, people can get hurt. Memories, energy, powers, life itself, gone into her, taken from them. Not out of cruelty, not out of malice, sometimes not even on purpose. Pain without evil is one of the hardest things to judge. A villain hurts people and you know where to place the blame. Sabretooth attacks someone and nobody needs a philosophy degree. The man looks guilty before the crime even happens. Apocalypse starts talking and you already know at least 6 families are about to suffer. Rogue is different. She can hurt someone while wanting the exact opposite. She can be careful and still be dangerous. She can love someone and still fear what love may cost. Here, the X-Men become more than politics for me. Rogue turns the metaphor into a body, into skin, into touch, into one of the most basic ways people tell each other, I am here. A hand on the shoulder, a kiss, a hug after a bad day. Simple things, ordinary things, things people do without thinking. For Rogue, every one of them comes with danger. And yes, people are right to be cautious. The sentence hurts, and it should. If someone can hurt you through touch, caution is not cruelty. Fear is not insanity. A person standing near Rogue and feeling nervous is not automatically evil. No one should have to pretend danger is fake in order to prove compassion. The problem begins when caution becomes rejection, when fear becomes the only emotion in the room, when everyone looks at Rogue and sees a hazard before they see a person. Cruelty begins there. Rogue is not only someone people fear, she is someone forced to fear herself. I keep coming back to it. Imagine carrying a danger everyone else can walk away from, while you have to wake up with it every morning. Imagine being the person others need protection from, and the person who needs protection from your own skin. Imagine wanting ordinary love, while your own body turns ordinary love into a threat. No cosmic firebird needed, no metal apocalypse, no giant robot. Just a girl learning how to survive her own touch. Rogue matters for a reason. Danger is not the same thing as evil. A person can require caution and still deserve tenderness. A person can hurt someone by accident and still deserve dignity. A person can carry a risk and still deserve a life larger than everyone's fear of them. Rogue proves a person can be dangerous and still deserve love. And honestly, she might be the clearest answer to the entire essay. Is humanity right to fear the X-Men? With Rogue, the answer is painful. Yes, someone can fear what her power can do. Yes, someone can be careful. Yes, someone can step back. Still, if fear is all they feel when they look at her, they have stopped seeing her. They are not looking at Rogue anymore. They are looking at a warning label. and no one should have to live as a warning label. Rogue's tragedy is not only her power, it is the possibility of being reduced to it, treated like a problem to manage, a risk to contain, a body with danger attached. The world looks at her hands and forgets her heart. Gambit does not. And I know, Gambit enters a room with cards, a coat, and an accent so aggressive it should have its own passport. He is not exactly subtle. He flirts like a man dodging both death and good judgment. Yet with Rogue, his role matters. He sees the danger. He still sees her. Not as a weapon, not as a curse, not as a problem, as Rogue. Pain follows from here. After a lifetime of fear, distance, restraint, and wanting more than her own body would safely allow, Rogue lets herself want a future. Not a throne, not a revolution, not a speech, not some grand answer to human-mutant relations. Just love. Just one person reaching for her without making her feel like a disaster. Just one chance to be seen as more than the danger she carries. And then Genosha happens.
Chapter 7. Genosha and the Point of No Return. And then Genosha happens. Genosha is where the essay turns against me. Up to now, I have been making the uncomfortable argument. Humanity has reason to fear mutants. Not hate them, not hunt them, not build machines to erase them. Fear them. Fear what Jean can become. Fear what Magneto can do. Fear telepathy. Fear powers appearing in children before anyone knows how to control them. Fear a world where one bad day can become a disaster with a body count. I still believe all of that. Then Genosha happens, and suddenly the question changes. Are humans right to fear mutants? Yes. Are mutants right to fear humans? Also yes. Absolutely. No hesitation. Genosha matters because it is not mutants attacking the world. It is mutants trying to have one. A home, a nation, a place where they do not have to hide in basements, mansions, back rooms, alleys, or anywhere else the world allows them to exist as long as they stay quiet. Genosha is mutants standing in the open, not apologizing, not begging, not asking to be tolerated from a safe distance. Living, dancing, laughing, falling in love, believing tomorrow might finally belong to them too. That is what makes it hurt. The cruelty of Genosha is not only the deaths, it is the life interrupted, the future cut off mid-sentence, the ordinary happiness turned into evidence. People were not marching toward war. They were not preparing to conquer humanity. They were not gathered together as some army waiting to burn the world down. They were trying to breathe, trying to celebrate, trying to exist without lowering their voice. And fear found them anyway. After the Rogue chapter, Genosha hits even harder for me. Rogue spends so much of her life treating touch like danger. Every hug has a warning attached. Every kiss carries risk. Every piece of affection asks for control most people never have to think about. Then Gambit enters her life with the confidence of a man who owns 3 jackets, 0 fear, and no survival instinct when a beautiful woman is involved. He sees her, not the warning label, not the risk, not the power. Her. Rogue finally lets herself want something simple. Not a throne, not a revolution, not some grand answer to human mutant politics. Just love. Just a future. Just one person reaching for her without making her feel like a disaster. Then the sky opens, and the world takes it from her. Gambit's death is one of those moments where the story stops being entertainment for a second.
it becomes a wound. Gambit was there from the beginning for me. Ultimate Alliance, the cards, the coat, the attitude. The kind of character who walks into a room and somehow makes everyone else look underdressed. He had style before I even understood what style was. He was cool in a way only comic book characters can be cool, where every choice is impractical and somehow correct. Then X-Men 97 takes all of that charm, all of that swagger, all of that life, and puts it in front of a massacre. He does not die as a threat. He dies as proof. Proof of courage. Proof of love. Proof of humanity. Proof that mutants are not the monsters people keep trying to make them into. A man accused by the world of belonging to a dangerous species gives everything to protect others. Gambit dies proving the thing mutants are accused of lacking is exactly what they have. That is why Genosha feels like a point of no return. Not only for the characters, for the argument. Humanity has evidence. Mutants have graves. Humans can point at Magneto and say, "Look what he can do." Mutants can point at Sentinels and say, "Look what you built." Humans can fear Phoenix. Mutants can fear extermination. Humans can fear uncontrolled power. Mutants can fear controlled systems. Humans fear what one mutant can do. Mutants fear what an entire society can justify. That last one is the killer. One mutant losing control can destroy lives. That is terrifying. No sane person should pretend otherwise. A society losing its humanity can destroy a people. That is worse. Genosha is the moment everyone can point to history and say their fear makes sense. No one walks away clean. No one gets to pretend their fear came from nowhere. Everyone has scars. Everyone has a reason. Everyone has a story they can hold up and say, "See, I told you, look what they do." That is the tragedy of X-Men at its strongest.
Fear keeps proving itself. Then fear uses proof as permission. Magneto becomes unavoidable after Genosha. Not right, not safe, not the answer. Unavoidable. Every list, every collar, every sentinel, every massacre makes him harder to dismiss. When he says humanity will choose control over coexistence, Genosha stands behind him like a graveyard answering in silence. No wonder his rage grows teeth. No wonder peace sounds like a trap. No wonder the dream feels fragile. Still, Gambit gives the story another answer. Not a speech, not an empire, not domination. A sacrifice. Magneto turns fear into thunder. Gambit turns love into action. Both come from the same world. Both are shaped by the same cruelty. One says, "Never again," and reaches for power. The other says, "Remember," and gives his life. Genosha needs both of them in the essay. Magneto shows what fear can turn into when it hardens. Gambit shows what love can still do after fear has already won. And Rogue is left standing in the wreckage. That image matters. The girl who could not touch the world without danger finally finds someone willing to reach past the danger, then loses him to the kind of violence everyone kept pretending was just public safety with better branding. That is where the whole argument breaks open. You can understand why humans fear mutants. You can understand why mutants fear humans. You can understand Xavier's dream. You can understand Magneto's rage. You can understand Rogue's loneliness. You can understand Gambit's sacrifice. And understanding all of it does not make the answer easier. It makes it worse. By the time Genosha happens, the question is no longer clean.
It cannot be. Humanity has evidence. Mutants have graves. Everyone has a reason to be afraid. The only question left is what fear is allowed to become. Final chapter. So, is humanity right? The only question left is what fear is allowed to become. So after all of that, after Jean, Magneto, Rogue, Gambit, Genosha, the registration lists, the Sentinels, the government acting suspicious in every room it enters, and the childhood crush journey that somehow led me from Jean Grey to emotional maturity through Rogue, is humanity right to fear the X-Men? Yes, I think they are. And I know 10-year-old me would hate that answer. 10-year-old me would be disgusted. 10-year-old me would look at adult me like I betrayed the team, the dream, and possibly Rogue herself. Which hurts, because disappointing childhood me is one thing. Disappointing Rogue feels legally and spiritually worse. As a kid, I would have said no without thinking. The X-Men were the heroes. Humans were the angry mobs, the corrupt politicians, the scientists with no sunlight in their lives, and the government agents who always walked into a scene looking like they had already done something illegal. The answer felt simple. Humans feared mutants, and humans were wrong. Now I think the kid version of me was right about the cruelty and wrong about the fear. Humanity is right to fear what mutants can do. They are wrong to fear what mutants are. That is the line. The danger can be real. The person can still deserve love. Fear is not morality. Fear is an alarm. An alarm can save your life. It can wake you up. It can tell you smoke is in the house. It can tell you something is wrong before your brain catches up. It can also make you burn the whole house down. The problem starts when fear stops saying, be careful, and starts saying, do whatever it takes. Make a list, watch them, track them, control them, contain them, build something to handle them. Call it safety, call it order, call it public responsibility, call it anything other than what it becomes. That is how fear turns into registration. That is how registration turns into surveillance. That is how surveillance turns into sentinels. That is how a society looks at children and starts seeing threats with homework. And after Genosha, no mutant owes humanity the comfort of pretending they feel safe. That is the part the essay cannot run away from. Humans fear what one mutant can do. Mutants fear what everyone else can agree to do together. One mutant losing control can destroy lives. A society losing its humanity can destroy a people. Both fears have evidence. Humans can point to Magneto and Phoenix. Mutants can point to Sentinels and Genosha. Everyone has a scar. Everyone has a reason. Everyone can say, look what they did. That is what makes X-Men hurt more than most superhero stories. It is not just asking who wins the fight. It is asking what happens when everybody has proof and nobody has trust. That is why Xavier's dream still matters. Not because it ignores fear, not because it pretends danger is fake, not because Charles Xavier is perfect. The man is still a telepathic school principal with more secrets than a government basement. I respect him, I believe in his dream, and I still do not want him walking around my memories like he forgot his keys in there. Xavier's dream matters because it refuses to let fear be the final answer. It says coexistence has to remain possible, even when history makes it look stupid. It says people are more than their worst potential. It says danger does not erase dignity. It says the future cannot belong only to whoever is most afraid. Magneto understands the wound. He understands the pattern. He understands the list before the machine. He understands the polite language before the violence. He is right about history. He is wrong about destiny. That is his tragedy.
So yes, humanity is right to fear the X-Men. Only if we are honest about what that means. Fear of power is reasonable. Hatred of existence is evil. Safety matters. Dignity matters. Caution matters. Mercy matters too. A dangerous person is not automatically a disposable person. A frightened society is not automatically a righteous one. And a victim does not become a monster the moment someone else feels afraid. That is where the X-Men live, in the tension, in the space between fear and cruelty, between safety and control, between protection and oppression, between the dream and the warning, between Xavier saying the world can be better, Magneto saying history says otherwise, Rogue standing there with a life she still deserves, and Gambit proving, at the end, that love can still matter even when the world is falling apart. That is why these characters last. Not only the powers, not only the costumes, not only Wolverine being cool enough to trick an entire generation into thinking Cyclops was boring. They last because they understand something painful. Fear is real. Danger is real. History is real. So is the person standing in front of you. The question was never whether fear exists. Of course it does. Jean makes it real. Magneto makes it real. Rogue makes it personal. Genosha makes it unforgivable. The question is what fear is allowed to become. Does it become caution? Does it become responsibility? Does it become mercy? Or does it become a list, a machine, a grave? The X-Men are not asking whether fear is real. They are asking what fear turns us into. And that is my answer. Humanity is right to fear what mutants can do. They are wrong to fear what mutants are. If you made it this far, let me know your answer in the comments. Are humans right to fear the X-Men? Or does fear always become the problem? Also, tell me which mutant proves your point the best, because I know some of you are about to defend Magneto like he is your attorney, and honestly, I understand. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want more essays like this, and if you subscribe, comment and let me know. I will subscribe back to anyone who subscribes to me as well. Until next time, remember, Cyclops was probably right. The government should never be trusted with a list of laser children. Jean Grey was a dangerous childhood crush, and Rogue did nothing wrong.